everyone, it's State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. Thank you for joining me for another Conversations with Kate. I'm delighted to be sitting down today with Rebecca Mooney, the Executive Director of the Melrose Alliance Against Violence. Thanks for being here, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
So it's a pleasure to get to talk with you about the work that you're leading on with MAAV, which is offering a range of violence prevention programs in our schools and community, including bullying prevention, domestic and teen dating violence prevention, mentoring, peer mediation, and peer leadership programs. You have such an extensive background in leadership in this space as a counselor and a nonprofit manager for decades, and we're so thrilled to have you as a community partner in Melrose and beyond on such an important, area.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'd love to start out by just talking a little bit about your personal career trajectory and the leadership, including your current role at MAAV. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
How far back do you want me to go? No. I would say that out of graduate school, my first job was with a tiny little counseling agency in Concord, Massachusetts. And I did a little bit of everything: individual counseling, family, group, photography group. And one of the things I did was peer counseling. And that was probably the most successful program. And I really saw the value of students educating other students, students supporting other students. It's such a win-win because the kids who are the peer leaders get so much out of it. It's such a boost for their self-esteem and their self-confidence. And then the students benefit from having them as well. So a job opened up at Andover High School running a peer counseling program, and that was my next career move. And I think at that point, I really was sort of honing in on the fact that working with young people, adolescents in particular, was really my passion. And so at Andover High School, I ran this peer counseling program. We had a class that was integrated into the curriculum of the high school. We had a drop-in center. We did many, many different programs. And then I left that job. I stayed home for a few years, had my two daughters. I actually, with a friend, started the Melrose Family Room.
Oh, sure.
During that time.
I've been a member. Yeah.
So that was my other big community project. I was very involved with that for a few years. And then I took the job with Melrose Alliance Against Violence. And I loved the idea of working in my own community. I was very upfront with them. I said, my experience and my passion is working with young people, prevention of all issues.
Sure.
My background is not domestic violence, but they really wanted to go in that direction. The agency was established in 1995. I was hired in 1997. So for the first few years, they had already done some of the basics of community awareness and training. So they really liked the idea of getting into the schools and working with young people and doing prevention. And they said, we'll train you on the other issues. So I was really lucky because at the time, Detective Mike Bloom was the domestic violence officer, and he just really took me under his wing and took me to so many trainings and meetings and introduced me to people. And I just sort of had a crash course in domestic violence as well as grant writing, because when I was hired, they said, the good news is we want you. The bad news is the grant we have is going to run out in 6 months. So it'll be up to you to generate your own salary.
Right.
And again, I said to myself, well, this is a good skill to learn. If they're willing to send me to trainings on grant writing, it would be a great skill. Never in a million years thinking the agency would grow the way it did and I would be there 24 years later.
Incredible.
So a lot of it, again, my background was counseling, working with young people, but a lot of the sort of just managing of a nonprofit, I would say I learned by doing and learned, from other people. I'm always really big on networking. I love learning from other people. I really believe in not reinventing the wheel if someone else has already done something. So I'm constantly accessing resources and learning from other people.
That's great. I don't know if you know, but my community conversation, the first one of this new year, was around lifelong learning and thinking about setting goals for yourself for 2022, including in the area of civic engagement and volunteerism, knowing that that's not only beneficial for your community, but it's also shown to be really beneficial for you personally to make those connections and learn. So as we talk, I want people to definitely be thinking about ways they might be involved with MAAV as an organization where they could volunteer or provide support.
Absolutely.
I also, it really resonates with me, the conversation around kids and prevention, both as a former teacher, as the mother of 2 young boys. And in my previous professional role, I was actually a designee to the governor's council to address sexual assault and domestic violence, and worked and supported a subcommittee of that council that focused on prevention education in the schools. So, we talked a little bit about, at a high level, some of the work that you're doing, but can you tell us a little bit more about sort of how that's evolved over time and the types of initiatives you're leading on with our kids here in Melrose and beyond?
Sure. So again, when they started the organization, their goal was really to raise awareness in the community about the problem and then link victims to resources for help. So that remains the heart of our mission, but we have just, grown and evolved to spend a lot of time on prevention. I personally believe I've dealt with so many victims now over the years where it's just so difficult with children, finances, just the emotional ties. It's so difficult to get out of these relationships. So my own belief is if we can prevent it in the first place, that's where we should put our time and energy. So again, the first few years, they established the walk, which is every October as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and the Candlelight Vigil, and did trainings for clergy, security officers at the hospital, police. And then 2 years later, when I was hired, was when we started the prevention in the schools.
Okay.
So it's funny because people will say to me, how did you do that? And I said, because I had worked in a high school, I just went and met with the guidance counselor, said, here's what we want to do. I just kind of assumed, that they would want this and that it was a good thing, and they did. So that's how our partnership began. And we developed, at the time, it was 6 sessions. It's now cut back to 3 because health has been cut back in terms of the time that the students take, have for taking health. But at the time, it was 6 sessions, and again, Detective Mike Bloom and I did everything together. So it was really nice because we had the team approach.
Right.
And his background was so different than mine. But our goal was really that every student in Melrose, in the Melrose Public Schools, I should say, would have this education of what is abuse, what are the different types of abuse, what are the early warning signs, what is the cycle of abuse, how would you get help for yourself or a friend. Those are the goals. And we had just all sorts of different activities. One really important piece of that program is a survivor coming in and sharing her personal story. And again, over the years, we've used different people, but there's one woman in particular who we've worked with for quite a few years now. And, the relationship started in 7th grade and progressed all through high school. So for her to come in and speak to 8th graders, they just really relate to her and her story. And she's got a gift really for connecting with young people and really painting the picture and explaining to them her thought process at every step of the way. And it's a pretty intense story, all types of abuse, severe physical abuse. And she did finally break away and press charges, and he actually, went to prison. So it's a pretty dramatic story, but we actually have her speak first because we find that the students take it more seriously after that. They see that it's, here's this person that, they could be friends with, and it happened to her. And she emphasizes over and over, it can happen to anyone. And if we have her go first, we can then sort of key off of her story as for the other 2 lessons to say, what were the controlling behaviors that you heard in her story? What were some examples of verbal abuse? Why did she stay? Or what did her friends do? We can just use it for teaching. So that's what we call that program Healthy Relationships. And that, again, has been in the Melrose Public Schools for 24 years.
It's incredible.
In different, different evolutions of it. But, and then we try to build on that as well we've done trainings for staff. We've done trainings for parents. Again, always teaching those basics of types of abuse, warning signs, cycle of abuse, how to get help for yourself or a friend. So that was one of the main things one of the first things of the prevention. But the second thing was, again, because of my peer leadership background, I was really big on that. So we devised we called it a student advisory board at first. The first few years of it, so it was a group of high school students who were interested in this issue. We convened, and we called them our student advisory board. And, the idea was that they would give input and advise us in terms of program development. Well, after a few years, they started doing so many projects themselves and had so many ideas that we changed the name to Student Action Board.
Yes. To
better reflect really who they were. So that has also been in place, 20 years probably. I'd have to look at my notes to see exactly what year it started, but a year or two after I came. And that has just become a really strong program that pretty much everything we do at the high school level, we do through our Student Action Board. Again, believing in this peer leadership approach.
Sure.
For example, they go into all of the freshman seminar classes, and that's just because it's a forum that we can reach the ninth graders. It's an opportunity for us, and they lead sessions on healthy relationships, red flags of abuse. We just did one on boundaries and consent, and again, ninth graders hearing these messages from adults is different than hearing it from their peers, or especially kids who are a year or two older, which is what it is.
Right.
And again, the student leaders themselves get a lot out of it. So those two things, I would say, are the most foundational long-term programs, Healthy Relationships and Student Action Board. In 2005, we received a federal grant for youth violence prevention, and it had 3 prongs to it. Teen dating violence prevention, which we were already doing, but we could build on that. Mentoring, which is a protective factor.
Right. And
bullying prevention. So those were the 3 prongs, and we did a lot of work. We researched the bullying prevention programs that were out there. We chose one that was called the Ulvaeus model. It's a whole school approach. And we just worked really, really closely in partnership with the middle school to implement that program. The idea of it was you had a steering committee that was made up of counselors, teachers, students, all the middle school folks, and then they were trained to then train the rest of the staff. So it was sort of a train the trainer model. It involved a discipline rubric where you really spelled out the different behaviors and the different consequences. We did assemblies for the students. It was a whole range of programs and activities. And then the mentoring program, we matched adult volunteers from the community with middle school students referred by the guidance department. Kids who just might fall through the cracks,
right?
Not necessarily students who needed more support, because again, these are volunteers, they're not trained counselors, but the kids who could just use a little extra attention and support.
Right.
And so, like a lot of our programs, we are basically funded by grants. We also have our fundraisers, like the walk is a fundraiser. We also get donations from individuals. All of it adds up. But a lot of times, the grant we have guides what programs we're focusing on at the time. And it's really hard, because once you start something, it's really hard to end it. It's like I always say, it's like a living thing. Like once you get something going, it's just really hard. But sometimes we have to let go of something because the grant has ended. In this case, we continue to do a little bit of the bullying prevention work, but not as much as we had been doing, because we see it as on the same continuum as teen dating violence and domestic violence. But really our primary mission is preventing teen dating violence and domestic violence. So we kind of had to let go of the bullying prevention, but we continued the mentoring program. It was so successful. And, it doesn't reach a lot of kids in terms of numbers, but it's a very intensive intervention for the ones that it does reach. And we were lucky to get another grant to continue the mentoring program.
That's
and
great.
Then the teen dating violence program, was core to our mission anyway, so that we were able to continue.
Got it. I've seen, mentees or mentors speak about their relationships, and it's very powerful. So.
Yeah, the program itself would run for about 2 years, but the majority of cases, again, it's like a living thing.
Of
you develop a
course.
relationship. They stayed involved. And
Absolutely.
I mean, we just have so many great stories of mentors helping their mentee, get into college or get their first job or whatever, just
incredible.
Really almost becoming like part of the family.
Right. So it's really helpful to hear about the evolution and how you brought some of your initial professional positions to MAAV and really integrated and made a critical foundation of the nonprofit to be around prevention. And then also to hear a little bit about how, the work is guided in part by the funding streams, and hopefully grants are really attuned to the latest sort of policy initiatives that are grounded in science and sort of experience, so that we're really driving at leveraging those moments in time in a life that can really shift a trajectory or really assist with a prevention in this case. Of course, as you mentioned as well, though, you're helping survivors. And so how would people who maybe are struggling with a violent situation or concerned about abuse be in touch with you?
So people can call. People can contact us through our website. People can email us. In the past, I would say people could just drop by, but right now, our offices are in the BB estate, which is not open to the public. So right now, that's not an option. But calling, emailing, again, contacting us through our website.
And can you tell folks who are listening, what your website is?
Absolutely. It's www.maav.org.
Great. And that would have the that would have the phone number and
yes,
all of that. Okay.
Yes. So yeah, people come to us in so many different ways. I always ask because it's just so interesting. People's doctors recommend, refer them to us. We have what we call palm cards, which are little cards all over Melrose in waiting rooms and restrooms that have our number as well as the number of lots of other domestic violence agencies. Because some people don't want to go in their own community. They really are not ready to do that. They want to be anonymous. They would rather call another agency. But I'll never forget one time someone calling me from the bathroom at Starbucks and just whispering and saying, I'm looking at this little card and it was just she was just sort of realizing for the first time that her relationship might be abusive. So when people do contact us, I always try to get them to come in person and meet with them in person, because these relationships are always complicated. It's always a long story.
Right.
And even then, when they come in, I know I'm only hearing the tip of the iceberg because it takes time to develop trust. But when they do come in, we do what we call short-term intervention. So I basically listen, a lot of listening and support, and then assess what they need and help them connect with those resources. So we don't do ongoing counseling. I would refer them to a therapist. And we actually have a few that we work with a lot who really have a deep understanding of this issue, because not all therapists are trained on domestic violence. But we also offer a support group. And that's been so important. The first 15 years of the organization, we always just referred people to other support groups, and we found them to be kind of spotty. They weren't always running, or sometimes they say, oh, we only have 1 or 2 people. We can't quite get it off the ground. Or they say, oh, we're in the middle of a 6-week session. They'll have to wait 4 weeks. And we actually have, our board of directors is made up of all people from different segments of the community, different agencies, but we always have a survivor on the board as well. And that's such an important perspective to have. And she really was a strong advocate. A support group had been so instrumental for her healing. So with her encouragement, we decided to offer our own group. And again, because we work so much in partnership with other agencies, that's how we're so small, but we're able to do a lot because of all these partnerships. The hospital offered space. And we hired a licensed clinical social worker to run it, which we've had a few different ones now over the years, but I think it's 10 years now that group has been going. And of course, with the pandemic, we switched over to Zoom.
Right.
But it's very unique. Not many communities have this. And the good thing about Zoom is that people from all over the state really
can access and
are
be
able
involved.
to be involved. So that's been a really important part of what we offer. And almost everyone that I end up, any victim that comes forward and I help, Sometimes they need legal help. Sometimes they need counseling, sometimes counseling for their children, housing. But almost always I refer them to our group because everybody could use support. And, even if they have an individual therapist, there's nothing like sitting in a group and hearing other people who've gone through something similar and all of a sudden realizing, hey, it wasn't just me.
Sure.
Right. And seeing and hearing the pattern. The details are different, but the pattern is always the same. So a lot of times it's just eye-opening and a real lifeline.
That's really great. And I would also say, in addition to your website, on my website, I do have also a resource for personal well-being that includes how to contact MAAV as well as some other organizations, hotlines, lines that you can text if, calling isn't an option for people who are in abusive relationships, as well as some other behavioral health and mental health support. So people are welcome to look at that. It's at kateforrep.com, and you can just click on the COVID-19 page with resources.
I think that texting is such an important feature, especially, during the pandemic, we talk a lot about how victims are even more trapped because people are home.
Exactly.
And it makes it hard to even just make a phone call. So having that option to text is really important.
Right. So one thing I heard from you that reaffirmed many times is the value and the power of community engagement, whether that's in your prevention education work, in your survivor support group. And that's something I'll think about when I'm, as a policymaker, considering ways in which we want to continue to support work in this area. Are there other things you'd want local leaders in Melrose or other municipalities or policymakers at a state or federal level to just be thinking about when we're considering, how to address these issues and support the important work that your organization and others are leading on? Well,
we would love to see teen dating violence prevention in every school in Massachusetts. When we talk about our program, I work with a lot of folks at the high school who don't live in Melrose, and they'll say to me, do you realize the high school in my town does nothing? I think we've been around so long now that people almost take it for granted, the education we provide in the schools, but many schools have nothing. And so we would like to see that legislated. And in fact, during the pandemic, we spent a lot of time making our Healthy Relationships program online because we didn't want the students to miss the program. And after it was done, we were like, now we're going to go back to in person, but we put so much work into this and we really like it. We think it's really effective. So we came up with the idea of sharing that with other communities. And we just started, we worked with Reading as been our kind of our guinea pig, because now it can be kind of hybrid. We have this off-the-shelf program that they can just use, gives them all the content, gives them the outline, but they're in person with the students so they can, continue the discussions in person. So we're realizing, because of that initiative, we're talking with folks in Winchester, and we're going to be reaching out to Wakefield and Stoneham.
Oh, good.
And again, realizing that this kind of education is not across the board.
Right.
And I guess the other thing I would just mention is, instead of any specific legislation, just always getting the input of survivors and of people that work in the field, because sometimes what I find is that a lot of times policy is made in reaction to something that's happened, a tragedy, and it's all with good intentions. Everyone's trying to do the right thing, but sometimes there are different sides to the issue that need to be examined and weighed. Just for one example, I think it was in the wake of the Jared Remy case. There was some legislation about not publishing in the newspaper the police reports of domestic violence. And the idea was to try to get people to report more, that they thought that keeps people from reporting. But kind of the other side of it is that people then stop thinking that domestic violence is a problem in their community if they're not seeing it in the paper. So I think the happy medium to that, if there is such a thing, is to just still publish that there was a call without putting any details about it.
Right.
I think that was really the intent of it.
or
just
providing sort of aggregate numbers, on a periodic
Right.
basis, so
Right.
that the community is aware that, in fact, maybe things are trending up during the pandemic, for example, even while
Right.
we want to be sensitive to, survivors'
Right.
privacy.
But it was a little controversial, I
Yes.
guess is what I'm saying. There were a couple of different sides to it. So I noticed Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito were out in Springfield the other day, and I was just so happy to see that they were sitting down and hearing from survivors and getting their input on this issue about dangerousness hearings.
Right.
So that's what I would advocate,
Absolutely.
is hearing from victims, hearing from folks who work professionally in the field.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're pretty much out of time, but I want to give you just a minute to encourage how people can be involved, if there are any upcoming events that you'd like to raise up, so if people are aware and can think about joining you.
Sure, I'd love to. So the next thing coming up is our community coffee house, and we're really excited to have it back in person this year because it's the 9th annual.
Wow.
I cannot believe it's the
Yeah.
9th annual. But the last 2 years, we still had it, but we did it remotely. We did it online. So we're back in person at the Temple, Sunday, April 10th at 4:00 p.m.
Okay. Writing that down.
Yeah. And I think one difference this year, it'll be very, very similar, made up of students and adults in the community, so much talent. It's just a wonderful event. But this year we're going to sell the tickets online in advance because we are going to limit the number of people to be safe. So look for that.
Okay.
And then the Melrose Run for Women is coming up, and it's the 25th year.
Ooh.
So big anniversary year. And just shout out to the Melrose Running Club because they organize the entire event and give the proceeds to us. It's such a gift.
That is lovely.
And we're just hoping and praying. It's a nice day.
And it's in May.
It's on Mother's Day, which I
On Mother's
believe
Day.
is May 8th this year.
That's my oldest's birthday. That happens frequently, actually.
Yeah, it seems like it's usually the 8th, 9th, or 10th.
Right, exactly.
And that's, at Pine Banks Park, 9 a.m. You can go to the just Google Melrose Running Club,
Okay.
and it'll come up and, how to register for the race.
Great. Well, these are two very lovely events coming up, another opportunity to be in the community and support your good work and, be mindful of raising up your mission and supporting survivors and also really leading on prevention education, which is so critical. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us
You are
today.
welcome.
It was really lovely to get to chat with you over conversations with Kate, and I'm sure I'll see you out in the community soon.
Thank you, Kate.